I wanted to bring in a man that we've had on the show a few times before, and I think that this is Peter Kiernan, who is basically the man looks at the world, looks at trends, looks at things that are happening, and tries to figure out what that's going to mean for all the rest of us. And
that's helpful.
This is interesting. Tomorrow, Peter, there is going to be an election in Iran. And this is not making news here in the United States. Certainly not at a significant level because we're in our own election cycle here, obviously. But this could have huge implications for how the Middle East is going to start to organize itself over the next few years. What do you see happening here, Peter?
Well, it's a fabulous point that you make because we're so focused on what's going on in the United States election. I'd like to take everybody's attention for just a moment to an election that occurs tomorrow in Iran. There are two institutions that are having elections. One is for their parliament, and another is for what they call the Assembly of Experts. And the Assembly of Experts basically has the job of picking the next Ayatollah. Now, over in Iran, they don't have primaries and they don't have political parties. What you do is you apply to run for office to a group that's called the Guardians. Those are 12 men who are picked out by the Ayatollah.
Mm-hmm. Guardian Council, right?
The Guardian Council, exactly. And so in the last few months, 12,000, actually more than 12,000 people applied to run for office. The vast majority were eliminated. Many of them because they weren't conservative enough. And as an example...
Now, eliminated meaning that they were not being regarded. They weren't executed. They just weren't being regarded.
Good point. Good clarification.
It's not that tough.
Yeah, okay.
Were there any women in that group? The women, are they allowed?
The answer is about 10% of the people who applied were women. All of the women who applied to run for the Assembly of Experts, Anna, were turned down. There are no women who are running.
586 women total, right?
So here's the dilemma. The current Ayatollah is 76 years old. He's not in great health. This is an election for an 8-year term. So the group that's going to get elected tomorrow is going to appoint the next Ayatollah, in almost all likelihood, who is likely to lead for 20 years, for a generation. And what they've done is they've pre-selected only 181 people are going to be allowed to run for the 88 seats. And some of them were actually being asked to run unopposed. This has been a preordained deal, and it is going to mean an entrenchment, an increased hard-line position in the Assembly of Experts, virtually guaranteeing a generation of hard-line leadership in the supreme part of Iran.
Now, we'd like you to explain this, because this is, I think, most Americans don't understand what's happening over there. We just know that Iran is has been a thorn in our side for many, 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 many years, going back to the late 1970s, obviously, with people seeing the movie Argo. That might put them into, clue them into what happened when our embassy there was raided by the student revolution, as it was known, and that was all led. And, you know, when you think about student revolutions, you tend to think about sort of liberalization movements, and that's not what happened there, because it was basically inspired by the Ayatollah then, Khomeini, not to be confused with the Ayatollah now, Khamenei. And this was, it turned out to be a conservative revolution, a religious conservative revolution of this Shiite cleric. And you got to remember too that as we've been trying to deal with politicians in Iran, whether it was the crazy president who liked to wear the members only jacket that we were dealing with in the the early part of the 2000s. Yes, and that seems to me to be not the guy that we really ever deal with. He's the public face, but the real power are these Ayatollahs.
Yes, and here's the perfect example. Here you had the Ayatollah Khomeini, who brought us that revolution in '79. His grandson applies to run for office and is disqualified because he's simply not conservative enough. So what you have is a balance of power that's being waged right now, and there are people who are reformists in Iran. There's a middle class. There are some youth who kind of want to get modernized, but their old guard is very powerful there.
You always hear that about Peter, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but you always hear that about Iran. You always hear that that there's the youth. It's a very young country. It's an educated country. But technically educated. They are obviously, they've been working on a nuclear bomb. They have scientists there. They have people who are, would maybe want to enter into the world economy and into the world culture in a little different way. What keeps them at bay here? What's really afoot there that makes the conservative nature of this? Is it just that they got old people that want to keep it conservative? Or is there something else?
You've had a long period of time where the judiciary, the Revolutionary Guard, the clerical councils, and some others who are not elected are hardliners who literally do not want any part of a nuclear deal with the United States. They don't want to be doing all these deals with Europe. They don't want to do anything with the United States. And most of all, they don't want to be told what to do, particularly by young people. And so this group is dominating the assembly of experts. And so the group that's going to pick the next Ayatollah, many of the members are in their 80s. This is literally an old guard. And when they say, and you asked the question, when they had women who were applying, they said, forget it. There are no women who are going to be part of this decision. Wow. And so what you have is a relatively moderate president, but then two governing bodies, the parliament and this assembly of experts, that are going to be quite the contrary. It looks like they're going to be extremely hardline. And in fact, some of the people who have been disqualified are the moderates. And so it's going to be a big impact on us because we're doing this deal with President Obama and Secretary Kerry with the hope that there'll be some moderation in the approach. Iran, we know, is sponsoring Hezbollah in Lebanon. We know they're working with Assad in Syria. We know they're backing the Houthi in Syria. They're clearly been a state sponsor of terror that emanates from this religious leadership. And that is what is being decided tomorrow.
So what impact do you think this will ultimately have on the United States if this hard line continues, or this is what happens with this election? How does that affect the nuclear deal?
Sure, it's going to show up in a bunch of ways. They're not going to be terribly collaborative on the nuclear deal. They're going to do what they want to do. I've never really felt, and I think a lot of Americans feel this way, that they are not really going to play ball in the way we'd like on the nuclear side. And having a big tilt to the conservative side is going to be a problem for people who want to make that nuclear deal turn out the way it first was arranged. The second thing that's kind of interesting is the balance of power in the Middle East. So last week, the Saudis say, you know what, let's tap out. Oil prices are too low. We're going to cap production here at our current rate. So Russia says, okay, I'll go along with that, and Qatar says we'll go along with that, and the Saudis say we're going to cap it here. Iran says nothing doing. In the 1970s, Iran was producing 4 million barrels of oil a day. It was a major player. Then for a decade, they were basically left alone in the desert. They want to come back, so they're not playing ball. And they are basically driving a lot of the energy in Iraq. So if you look at what's driving the Iraqi war, their war against ISIS, it's been driven as much by support from militias funded by Iran.
Peter, do you see... Yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry, finish that point.
So what you have is a Shiite power base being created with Iran and Iraq that is going to contest for supremacy of the Middle East the Saudis, who have basically been relatively inclined to work with the United States. Here you have Iran relatively disinclined to work with us. And this new power base of ultra-conservative hardliners that may be elected tomorrow could make it very difficult for Americans to get what we want to occur in the Middle East to occur.
So what you see Iran here is Iran has expansionist plans. I mean, for people who are familiar with the history of the region, and before Muhammad, there was Cyrus, the king, right, the Persian king, who basically controlled the entire region. And the Iranians see Iraq, or the Persians, if you will, post-Muhammad Persians look at Iraq as their land anyway. Right? They look at it, and actually until the partition in the aftermath of World War I, it kind of was. So do you see them expanding? Obviously, they think of Syria as theirs as well. They want more. They would love to find a way to get to the Mediterranean, as opposed to having to go through the Persian Gulf. There is, it seems like they have, and if what you're right about here, Peter, is that they've got this conservative expansionist position, they want to be dominant, and we just gave them $50 billion with which to do it.
Right, and here's a perfect example. Iran has turned into an entrepreneur's candy store. They are signing deals. They just bought 120 Airbus airplanes. They just signed a $5 billion mining deal. They just signed a deal with Peugeot to manufacture cars in Iran. So the number one car in Iran is going to be Peugeot and Citroën. They're basically reaching out on one side to tap the resources in Europe, not in the United States, but in Europe, to fund their business. They think it's going to take $30 billion to bring their oil business back. They're going to take all of that, and what are they going to do with it? They're going to build an enterprise that, just as you say, they're going to link up with the Iraqis. They're going to link up with Syria. They've already linked up with Russia, and they're going to create an arc all around Saudi Arabia. And they're going to look. They have twice as many people. Between the Iraqis and the Iranians, they will produce just as much oil as Saudi Arabia. This is Cold War III. This is a developing Cold War between the Saudis and the Iranians for dominance in the Middle East. And it also happens to break along religious lines because you have a big Shiite majority in Iran, a big Shiite majority in Iraq, and that's going to expand and surround a Sunni-dominated business in Saudi Arabia. So this is the beginning of a change of the balance of power in the Middle East. And a lot of this is going to occur tomorrow because the election of the experts, they're going to pick, in fact, one of the people who gets elected tomorrow could well be the next Ayatollah.
All right. Peter, thank you very much.
Yeah,
thanks for drawing our attention to
This is
this.
stuff that's worth, thank you. It's a pleasure. It's worth watching. I know there's a lot of energy directed on our current election, but this is going to have big impact on us going forward, and it's a change in the balance of power in the Middle East, and it's worth paying attention to. Thank you for letting me to come on to talk about it.
Thank you, Peter. Appreciate it. Peter Kiernan, who's a forecaster, trends analyst.